Yo, what's up? It's Jimmy on from Glitchy Thumbs. In today's video, we're going to be creating character 1.5, which is the last character in this character set. I have many character sets coming out. I just want to create as many as I can so I can learn the whole Blender process and see where I can improve and try to make this a little bit more efficient. I hope you've been liking these videos. Please like and subscribe. It really helps. Let's get to the video. This Blender file has all the characters in character set 1. That's why you usually see me starting out with the previous character, which is a continuation from the last video. I start with the same Blender file. I usually start with the shortcut add-on. I have to click start because this is actually showing all the hotkeys that I'm using and all my mouse clicks and everything in Blender. That makes everything much more efficient. In case I forget to say what buttons I'm clicking, you can at least refer to the corners. It's either going to be on the bottom right or on the bottom left. Refer to that if you need to find the keystrokes during a specific moment in the video. I start off hiding the last character. That way we only have the reference. I move this over. This is going to be character 1.5. He looks like a goofy faced alien. We're going to call him Goofy Face. That's going to be his name. Unless you guys have a better name for him, leave it in the comments. I'm just winging most of this as I'm going. I'm coming up with names. I'm coming up with ideas. That's just how my brain works. That's the beauty of going through game development, creating characters, because it's going to be very spontaneous. I have no idea what I'm going to say since I'm doing voiceovers over these previous screen recordings. Everything is kind of like a thought process. I'm narrating what I did before to create these characters, but also based on what I know today. It's a good way to actually see if I actually improved based on what I worked on before and how I would improve the process of the entire Blender workflow today. That's pretty cool for me. It's also, I think, super helpful for people who are actually getting into Blender, because I also started as a beginner. These videos actually demonstrate that. I didn't know much. You can tell throughout each video my progress, whether it's explaining everything, whether it's creating the actual characters or just creating some sort of workflow that works for me. Everybody's workflow is going to be a little bit different, and not everything's going to work for you because of the way our brains work. Not everyone's the same, but at the same time, you can still learn and find something that works for you. That's the beauty of watching a bunch of content, a bunch of videos, and formulating some sort of game plan for you to create your game mechanics. That's how it's going to be working for me. I'm going to be going with the flow. That's how I've always done it. This is how I'm going to create all these characters, create all these game mechanics. I hope you guys enjoy. I start off with the plane, which is my usual go-to method. I'm getting a little bit faster at this. I really like using it. Like I said, it's very versatile. I can use it for pretty much anything. At this point, for simple characters, of course, anything complex, it requires a lot more thinking power. We'll be able to see that in future videos because my characters get very, very complex. Well, not complex, but the ideas just start compounding and I start adding on more clothes, or I start adding on more features. They start getting more detailed because I was spending a lot more time drawing in Procreate. That's a very cool progression that I've been making, and I really like that. We start extruding to the right and trying to get to the end of the reference. I think in the previous videos, I was doing it in sections, but now as I've been using this a lot more, I know it's just much easier to get to the end of the reference and then do loop cuts. That's the thought process for this character. I'm starting to align these vertices early on because he has a sharp mouth. I wanted to get that out of the way, I guess. It's easier to get these sections when you just extrude a smaller portion and then just finish off extruding for the entire face. Whenever you need more vertices or edges, do a loop cut, and that allows you to move the end vertices without ruining the shape that you like. And you can make as many cuts as you want. I still need to look into best practices because there are times where I'm just making a lot of cuts, but I don't really know if it's best to do less cuts or more cuts. You need to drink water. Sorry about that. Can't breathe. I don't know why. All right, so we move on to the right side. I'm using the middle mouse wheel to make additional loop cuts because that's how easy it is in Blender. You just make the loop cuts whenever you need the vertices or edges. I try not to move too much of the edges. I try my best to keep everything aligned just because, I don't know, it just feels more organized to me. At least that's how my brain organizes it. Like eventually I want all the lines to be the same size, except for like areas where I need more cuts in my shape. I grab these top vertices and extrude to the top. This just makes the process much quicker. Instead of trying to focus on the small details in the beginning, I'm just trying to block out the actual shape similar to the reference, then making loop cuts as I go, because we know we need the edges to pull out the character later on. Sometimes when you do loop cuts, it doesn't cut directly across to the other side. You can see that with the yellow line. It's not going from the far right to the far left. When this happens, I just make my own vertices by subdividing between two other vertices and then just using the knife tool to cut where I want to create an edge. That's a method that I use when it's not working correctly. Again, it's still not working correctly. I just use the loop cuts that's allowed and then do the same thing, subdivide and knife from one vertex to the other. Once we have our plane that resembles our reference, now we can move the outer vertices into place to get it more similar to the reference. If you want more of a curvature, you definitely need to do more loop cuts because those edges help keep the shape of the character while you're moving the more outer vertices. Some of the vertices you don't really need, like this far right one, because it doesn't really make a difference having that. Look at the difference. I dissolved it and you can't really tell. Sometimes you have to just make that decision on getting rid of those unnecessary parts of your character. A lot of it is just going to be intuition. Like, you know how the character is supposed to look. You know how the process is supposed to be. You can cut corners at any time you want. The goal is just to try to finish this as quick as possible. At least that's my goal, because I want to get many characters done as quickly as possible. I can always polish them later when I have more time. But in the beginning, you just have to plow through and do whatever you can to make it the best as you can make it as quick as possible, but also not spending a lot of time. It doesn't have to be perfect because nothing in life is perfect anyways. Everything starts with an idea and then you build upon it, but you just got to get started. That's how I think. I created all these characters. It's time to actually build them out, to create them in 3D so I can actually see how they will function later on when I build them into a game mechanic, build upon that game mechanic to create an actual full game and an actual environment, actual gameplay loop, secondary characters, objects, enemies, anything that a game requires, menus, UI, UX. We move into trying to get the game in front of as many people as possible. That's an entire process on its own. I'm just using these videos to get my ideas across so that I remember everything that I'm thinking about as I'm working on these characters, because I have a lot of thoughts and not everything gets captured in written form, video form, in whatever form that I'm using as a medium. It's good that I'm creating these videos. I'm actually enjoying it because I end up talking about a lot of stuff that I would like to do. It's cool to actually rewatch certain things and remember, oh yeah, that's what I need to work on. That's what I should be focusing on. Now my thought has been stopped because I need to get back to the video. Anyways, once we have the shape that we like, extrude on the y-axis and create half a width that we like, because the other half we're going to mirror, and then delete those faces and then apply all transforms and then apply the quick origin so the origin's in the middle. To move this into a new collection, you need to be in object mode. This is character 1.5, the Goofball Head guy. I add a mirror modifier and get it as close as possible if that's the entire width that I like. And if I do, I select the middle vertices in X-ray mode because it grabs all the vertices on this perspective, but also like behind the mesh. You want to select all the vertices in the front, but also like the vertices in the back. That's the importance of being in X-ray mode. You move these vertices to the right, making sure clipping was on and it connects the two sides. That just makes it easier for you to switch back from the flat and texture. You just move it to studio and material. This is in viewport shading. Back in edit mode, we have all these edges for us to pull out, which is our normal part of our workflow. Just pull out as best as you can, whatever method works for you. I've been starting from the far left and just moving all the way to the far right. It just makes more sense to me to pull it out by columns first and then pull it out by rows. That's how my brain organized it. Some people might want to start in the middle and then pull it out to the left and the right, but that's a little confusing for me. I just do it this way. Sometimes when you're pulling out edges or vertices, you'll notice that the entire shape gets a little bit weird, which is what is happening here. That's because there's extra vertices or edges on top of each other. You can see me pulling this forward because of that. The inside vertice is not supposed to be there. It's supposed to just be the one in the front. That's the importance of having the target wheel on and off, which I have in my quick favorites. And I assign this to Alt Q on my keyboard. Every time something like this happens, I can just wield the two vertices together, and that actually fixes the mesh. And then you go back to the quick favorites in object mode, and I turn off target wheel, and now those vertices are connected into one, and the shape is back to normal. That's a good tip while you're working in Blender, because this is going to happen a lot when you're creating different shapes. Sometimes you can't see two vertices on top of each other because you can't really tell unless you're actually moving them to a different space. I've encountered that times, and that was my solution to fixing it. There's another solution where you can merge any duplicate vertices. I think you click M in edit mode, and then you click collapse or something like that, and it will get rid of all the duplicate vertices. Hopefully I have some content in regards to that somewhere, maybe in a future character or maybe in this video, but that'd be some pretty good tips that I should put out. And a lot of the stuff I'm learning along the way, so it's not like I know everything. I just learn what I need to know on the way. I encounter different problems, and I have to think of a solution in order to fix it. If I don't know a solution, then I have to go to YouTube or Google and then type in my issue and see how other people fixed it. That becomes my new solution for any problem. That's how my thought process works. I like to figure stuff out for myself first before I actually try to look for an alternative answer. But some people do it the other way around. They want to know everything first and then actually go in and be hands-on, but I'm the complete opposite. That just makes everything better, where I actually like learning new things and challenging myself, because then you're actually improving whatever you're doing, because that's the point. Like, why would you do something over and over if you're not actually getting better at it? It's just better to spend your time on something where you can actually learn so much, and I don't even know what I'm talking about. What I wanted to say was, it's just better to spend your time on your strengths, just keep getting better, than it is to spend it on your weaknesses. You know what you're really good at, and you know what you're not good at. Why don't you just excel at what you're good at first, be so good in that trait before you go to something that is your weakness? Occasionally, I practice with certain things that I'm weak in. Let's just say like coding is not my strong suit, but I do look at it here and there. But I just find myself going back to art and design or something like that, just because I just like it better. I'm just in more of a flow. I don't have to think as much. It's just natural for me to do most of these things. So that's why I like creating these characters. I just like the process. And it's actually helping me create more characters, which I want to do. With each character, it creates a new idea for me, which I need to be working on as well. Like, multiple things go off in my brain when I'm doing this. That's why I tend to focus my time on this. It's like life is leading you there, so might as well do it, right? Because why would you be thinking about this all the time if it's not that important? This is very important for me. I'm just trying to see my characters come to life, and whichever character becomes my superstar. There might be multiple superstars within these character sets, but I just have to get to them and create them to even know. Back to the video, I'm pulling out the edges by rows now. I'm actually improving on this process, getting a little bit better pulling out the shape, because I know based on muscle memory, we've already created 4 previous characters. The 5th one is definitely supposed to be better, but this one's more simpler than the previous characters. I owe it to the previous characters, making this process so much easier now. We're finished blocking out the head portion of character 1.5, the Goofball Head guy. Now we need to add the eyes. The eyes is always simple. Add the UV sphere. You don't have to make it more complex than it already is. I know in the reference, it's not circular, and I could make the eye if I want to with a plane, but that just makes life harder. Why reinvent the wheel when an eyeball is supposed to be circular like this? You just kind of have to eyeball everything, and just try to get as close as possible to the reference. It's as simple as that. Don't have to make it more complex if you don't need to. In the beginning of the process, everything just doesn't look good. You can tell, like, oh, this looks kind of weird. Like the low polys are off, it doesn't match the body mesh. But towards the end, when you finish with the shape and texturing, you can actually just shade smooth and everything just looks correct. That's where you want to get to. You want to get to the end point and not worry too much about how you started. You just have to get started and then get to the end. This character is a little bit odd because the eyes are in different positions. One's at the top, one's at the bottom. That's just how the reference is. That's just how I came up with that character. That's what we're going to have to go with. I renamed everything. Body, left eye, right eye. Super simple. We're done with adding the eyes. Now we're moving to UV Unwrap. Simple stuff. Always grab the middle edge loop and make sure you're in edge mode. You can press number 2 on your keyboard, right click and mark the seam, and you can see it in red. That's how you know that's where Blender is going to cut for your UVs, for your 3D mesh. You can see something went wrong. The entire edge loop didn't get selected. So normally when this happens, there's probably a face of some sort within the mesh, so you have to go find it, but I didn't see anything. But I know we had that issue with the vertices earlier on in the video, so that could have created some sort of unnecessary face on the inside that we didn't see. If you can't find it, you just have to select the remaining edges that wasn't selected. Sometimes I forget the hotkey, so I have to individually select each edge. Once you have that, you can press mark seam. I'm actually in the wrong mode. I'm usually in UV editing and we're able to see how our UV is unwrapping, but I didn't do it this time. I'm not sure why. I probably just forgot. For the eyes, right down the middle, mark the seam. Same thing for the right eye. A faster way to UV unwrap similar shapes is to just unwrap one of the shapes and then duplicate them to a certain location that you want. That way you don't have to unwrap both of the shapes because they're the same, and that just makes your life harder. Now I switch into UV editing. You can see our previous texture. I just add a new texture so that we can keep this separate for each character. That just makes it easier for me. When you're not in UV sync selection, which is the button on the left side at the top left, you have to manually unwrap on the right side. That's how you see your UVs. You can see in the UV there's an odd shape that doesn't make sense. That's why there's just 3 weird UVs. Usually when we cut in the middle, we see just one island. And now the UVs just look weird. That's where my thought process went, was okay, this doesn't look right. We need to go find that off set of faces. Looking into the object is actually very difficult because there's no best way to do it other than clicking a vertice and pressing the period on the numpad. It'll bring the camera closer and then you have to zoom in with the middle mouse button, but that's still difficult in itself. The way to do it would be to be in UV sync selection. That's what I'm doing here. And then just selecting the vertex or an edge or the face and then looking on the mesh to see what's highlighted. That's how you know, okay, what is this UV? Because it indicates where it is. You see I selected that vertex and I move it out. You can see there's this weird vertex that's actually moving, and that's not correct because it's like not visible. Like, where is it coming from? That's most likely due to something I did earlier on when I was creating the shape. I go into object mode, target wheel, turn it on, and I wheeled it to that vertex where it's supposed to be. You can see on the left side that fixed the UV, but where's this face coming from now? It's still there. We just need to get rid of that so that our UVs are correct when we're unwrapping it. This is where the troubleshooting is in Blender. You can actually just select the vertex and then dissolve it or delete it. That should work, but in this case it wasn't. I deleted that vertex. When I did that, you can see that there is an unnecessary face right there on the inside. That's not being visible anyways to the player for our game. That's why we want to get rid of any faces in the middle as best as we can, because there's just no reason to have them. Now that we know where the shape is, you can undo all the changes you made and then just zoom in to the shape. Now just select that vertex in the middle or an edge or a face and then delete it and then just unwrap everything again by pressing U. Now this is how the shape is supposed to be. That's from experience, knowing how your UVs are supposed to look like when you're actually unwrapping. Because I did this for the last 4 characters and it's always the same. I cut in the middle and the shape comes out as one big island like this, and that's just how I unwrap. in the beginning. It's just so much easier to understand this process, to do it as simple as possible, and then understand what's actually going on, and then go to the complex stuff when you understand the entire process. Now with this UV, you can actually see that there's this middle area in the UV that's pretty much the front of the face that you can cut out of the UV, because that's pretty much where the face is going to be. We're most likely going to draw the nose or something, I think. So you can actually cut that shape out by marking those seams and then marking another seam on the bottom of the character to cut the outer layer. It gives us this long UV island along with our cutout of our face. That way we can texture paint the two different islands a different color. We don't have to worry about filling in the incorrect color for each UV island. This is actually teaching us how to create complex UVs for our different characters. I'm not sure why I undid that, but it looks like I'm removing the middle seam. I did a clear seam and I marked it again. I think during this process, I didn't have live UV unwrapped showing. Everything that I'm doing, I had to manually unwrap. That was an inefficiency to this process. And I'm not sure what I'm doing here, actually. I think the UVs were just weird as I was cutting, or maybe I just wanted something very specific for my UVs. Not too sure what I was looking for, but I was trying to find that intersecting face right here on the left. It's intersecting between these two faces. And it just looks like I had to unwrap again. Weird. I guess I revert back to the original UV with the seam in the middle just to keep it simplified. I just rotated it to match the direction of our 3D mesh to keep it simple. But it looks like I did keep it simplified by just going with that one UV island. But that's the beauty of me recording everything, is because I'm actually trying new things. Even though I don't go with a new method, you can actually see my thought process as I'm creating this character. That makes better content anyways. You can actually see two different alternatives that I'm doing. I end up just choosing the original one anyways. That's why I like watching people's workflow process, because you can actually learn a lot from their thought process and see what works for you. There's multiple ways to actually do everything. There's no like one way to actually get to the answer. That's something to note, because a lot of people just think, oh, you need to do it this way. No, you can actually do it another way and still get to the same outcome. Now I need to unwrap the eyes. I like to keep things aligned now just because it's easier. When you know the shape on the right is aligned with the middle edge, you can see it's not aligned on the left side. That causes issues if you do end up drawing on your 3D mesh, because it won't come out the same. That's why it's a good practice to align everything. That's only if you're drawing on it. It's not an issue if you're just filling in the color most of the time, but in the long run, it just makes it easier if you align everything and know, okay, I can just draw onto it the way it is. That's how I set it up. Everything's set up by you creating this character. Most of the time, I think it's easier to select the islands by getting out of UV sync selection, because there's a fourth selection in UV editing, and that's selecting islands. That makes it easier to just select each UV and then just rotating that without having to worry about trying to get the entire shape. Blender knows that you want to select this specific one, but then it's difficult to actually get everything aligned because you have to go back to UV sync selection to actually see the two edges aligned. That's what I'm doing here. Once you have a certain method for yourself, you know what to do as you're going through the process. Your brain just like automatically does it. At least it does for me, since I've been practicing so many times. Now we just need to align these UVs for the eyes. The toolbar that you see is an add-on. I forget which one it is. And that just makes everything easier to align in UV editing, because you can just click certain buttons, it'll align everything for you. But sometimes I forget to use it anyways. We still have one of the eyes that we need to unwrap. I'm just making my life more difficult by unwrapping this again, because we have to do the rotation on the UVs again, switching back and forth between UV sync selections. That's a redundant thing to do. I could have just duplicated the eye from the other side. We would have already had the UVs already unwrapped, but I guess I didn't do that. Most likely because I was practicing. When you need to practice, you need to do that process over and over again. At least that's how I practice. Now that we have these duplicate eyes, we actually want to stack them, but that makes life even harder because I've already scaled them down. We need to match the sizing with each other. I'm probably sure there's a more efficient way to do this, but I didn't look it up just yet, so I have to manually do it. But we finished UV unwrapping, and now we need to texture paint this. What we do is add a material. I'm always reusing the same material and just changing the texture to the next character. We start out with a blank black color. That's how you know the material was assigned correctly. And this way, everything's like a blank slate for you to create whatever colors you want to. But for me, I just go with the simple colors as always. We'll call it grayscale. During the process, I duplicate the collection, most likely to keep a backup of the character before I do anything else to it. Sometimes I want to keep the 3D meshes with their mirrors, or I want to keep the separate objects because we end up joining them later on anyways. It really depends what backup you want. You can always duplicate the collection at any point in time and you'll have that backup. And it looks a little bit messy, but I just like to have everything visible for me. At any point to click one of those checkboxes and they'll appear and I can just work on whatever character there is. We still need to apply the mirrors, which I'm doing here. The reason I wanted to apply the mirror for the head or the body, whatever you want to call it, I'm planning to draw on the front side. We definitely need to have two different islands because the back part is not going to have a nose. Only the front part of the UVs is going to have the nose. I selected the back faces and then unwrapped to see both sides. I just clicked A and that selects everything. I just unwrapped again, but every time you unwrap, it redoes everything. If you moved your UVs or scaled it down, every time you click unwrap, it messes everything up. That's why you want to be strategic in how you unwrap everything first, especially if there's duplicate UVs and you're planning to stack some of them. You got to think about that as you're unwrapping, whether they're going to be separate or they're going to be stacked on each other using the same texture. You have to think about that as you're aligning everything. Otherwise, you're going to have to redo everything. That's going to create an issue. Like right now, I'm basically doing this twice because I didn't think of it earlier on in the process. One side, I scaled it down. It's because that's going to be a solid color anyways. Most likely that's the back part. The smaller UV is the back part. It doesn't really need additional texture space. I'm like experimenting as I go between different UVs, the way I scale them, what effects it actually does. Because most of the time my colors are the same. In the future, I hope I'm going to make this a little bit more efficient using one texture possibly, and then just aligning my UVs based on specific colors. That's something I want to do, but I haven't gotten to that point. I'm just practicing with each character different cuts in UV editing, just experimenting and learning the process a little bit better. I chose the gray color and then I'm drawing the pupil, and you can see that I couldn't tell which UV was which. I just drew it on one side first to see, but it's normally the left side that I have it on. As I place the black dot, that definitely starts to look like the goofball guy. Sometimes there's some extra specks on your texture as you're filling in the color. I don't know why this happens, but I just fix it by drawing in the area with a specific color. It happens here and there. I mean, you can keep them if you want. That makes your character more unique with the different specs, because these are all kind of abstract anyways, and art is subjective. That just makes everything cooler by keeping certain things, because that's what happened in your process anyways. Mostly art is like that. To draw the nose on the mesh, I need to make sure to fix the face orientation. You can see it's red where our plane is normally. That's when we need to flip to get everything blue. So edit mode, mesh, normals, flip. I think I had all the objects selected, so that actually flipped the eyes, which is incorrect. We actually only want to select the body or the head. You can always isolate each mesh if that's easier for you by clicking slash. That just shows the separate object by itself. That way you can just focus on like the body or the different eyes on its own. Now we have the face orientation correct. I can go into X-ray mode on our mesh and just use the draw tool to outline the nose. Before I do that, I have to save the texture, because when I'm drawing the nose, I'm going to be undoing a lot. We know from previous characters that when I do that, we lose our textures. That's the thought process here. I'm just outlining the nose on the right side, and you can see it appearing on our texture on the left side. This gives us an area of where the nose is going to be. So if you do want to redo this portion in another application like Procreate, you can do so. You can take that texture, airdrop it to yourself, and then fix it later on. I think of things as placeholders. It doesn't have to be final right now. It's just an idea of the character This is like the prototype character. Eventually, if you want to polish it, you'll do that later on in the process. That completes our texture paint. Now we need to rig the character with Rigify so we can create the bones. I add an armature, select single bone, check in front so we can see our bone in front of our mesh every time. Delete that bone. There's different samples that we're going to add on the bottom right. That's like different presets that Rigify has for different bones. This process is a little bit confusing when you're starting out. I'm not sure if I explained that in the previous, I probably did, but as you're working with bones, you actually get better at it. Like, I haven't tried a lot of the different Rigify samples just yet, but I do have a list of what they look like, but I've only experimented with some of the default ones. Like, every character needs the head bone for sure, and the spine bones. Those are the ones I stick to mainly, along with like the tentacle and tail. Those are like the default bones that I use. I'm adding the head here, and then I add a basic spine, and it's all experimental. I know character 1.5 is just basically a head, but different bones have different movement in terms of how your rig is going to be later on. So it's good to experiment using these different bones and then just aligning them so you at least understand the process. I'm aligning spine bone here. I go into side view and make sure everything is straightened out. I actually don't know the difference whether you have straight bones or curved bones. I just like to have everything aligned in general. That's why you see me straighten everything most of the time. I move everything towards the center. To connect these bones, you click the endpoint of the spine, Shift S, bring the cursor to the selected endpoint, and then click the endpoint of the head bone, Shift S, and selection to cursor. Now they're pretty much connected. For the eye, you can select that middle vertex and move the cursor to selected with Shift S. You can just press, I think, Shift A and add this single bone to that area, and you just have to rotate it. These will be the eye bones. Most of the time I don't use the eye bones much. It's just more so for placement purposes. I think if I do end up using it, I'll at least have it ready. The only reason why I don't use it is because it's like a limitation in BuildBox where I can't use the eye bone for like blinking or something. In pose mode, we want to make sure we change the eye bones to basic super copy and uncheck deform. You can see why I do this process, I think, in the ghost video, which is character 1.1. So you can refer to that to see a better understanding of why I do that. Once we have these bones, I click the checkbox for names, and that shows the names of each bone. And we want to rename the eye bones with FNF2. Change it to I.R and then I.L, and then move all the bones to their different layers. The head in the first layer, spine in the third layer. On the right side, in the Rigify bone groups, click Add Standard. These are the values for the different colors that's going to be used for your rig layers. We know we need the head, head tweak, spine, spine FK, spine tweak, and the eyes. Keep all the bones separate in different rows. The head's in row 1, spine is in row 2, the eye is in row 3, and then the color codes are usually the FK and tweak. 5, 4 are the usual ones. Any other ones that you want a different color, just use a different number. The eyes, I move to the 6th layer. Sometimes I need to count this because it's like confusing because I can't remember where everything is because I'm trying to do as fast as possible, but it happens. It's just all practice in the beginning until it becomes muscle memory. Once we're done with that, we go into pose mode because we need to move the tweak layers and the FK layers as well. It's usually just the next column from the dot. That's how I remember it. That's how you keep everything in their correct layers. Once you're done with that, you go to object mode, click generate rig. Sometimes there's an error when you're generating the rig. The way I know, there's an error at the bottom, but also I don't see the rig, which is like different layers on the screen. Now you have to troubleshoot what went wrong. It has to do with something with the head. I unchecked connect chain, and that's probably the issue. I probably didn't need to check the checkbox for connect chain because we already connected it with the method earlier on. I click regenerate rig and we don't have an error anymore. When you see the layers of the rig, that's when you know it's successful, that there was no issues, and you can just hide the bones that you used. If you need any backups of these separate objects, you should just duplicate them and then drag them to your duplicate collection. That way you'll just have it just in case. because now we're actually going to join the separate objects into one. That way it makes everything easier. For character 1.5, now in object mode, you just select the body mesh, shift select the rig, and then press Ctrl P and select with automatic weights. Now your rig is assigned to your character. Now you can go into pose mode and select any of these layers. But before we do that, we need to save our texture. I probably didn't save it because of the nose, but maybe I did. We're pretty much finished with rigging the character. Now we can actually animate character 1.5. If you get distracted with too many layers on the screen, you can hide that with the different names that we came up with for the rig layers. Just select each of the spine layers and move them up, move them down, move them left and right, rotate them, whatever comes to mind to you. Find something that you like for an animation, usually starting with an idle animation. That's what my thought process is for the time being. Think about what an idle animation would be for character 1.5. Normally for me, it's just something moving in place. For him, it's going to be looking like he's breathing in place. One of the layers is fine to just create the keyframe animation. I turn the record button on and then press I to insert the keyframe at frame 0. I drag this up and down, see which movement I like. It looks like I liked one of the chest layers better with the movement. I moved to that one, inserted the keyframe at 0. At the 10th frame, moved it up by 0.05. This is pretty much what I usually do. Everything's I'm just moving by 0.05 or like 0.1 and then just moving it down back to 0. Just seeing that as I scrub through the timeline for the animation. Sometimes I like to experiment. You can see me like rotating. You can see how the shape kind of deforms to match the movement. Sometimes it doesn't look good. You don't have to use it if you don't want to. It's just all experimental. Just play around, see what you like. I guess I like that movement at 30th frame. If you have the record button on, anything that you do is automatically recorded as a keyframe. That's something to note. If you don't like that, you can always delete the keyframe or undo. You can see that I removed the one on the 30th frame and just redid that. I'm just typing in values. It looks like I wanted a movement where he moves up and down on the 10th and 20th frame. When we get to the 30th to 40th frame, he'll rotate his face. That's the difference that I wanted for the idle animation. I wanted to loop that. So we just need to duplicate the keyframes at the 10th and 20th keyframe and move it over to 50th and 60th. Click play to see that movement. Just experiment at this point on different movements with the different keyframes. This is another way to get better at animation, is just to understand the process of how keyframes work. You're essentially just moving the character to a different location or rotation and then just duplicating that on a timeline. So in every frame it does that movement. That's as simple as it gets. If you want more complex animation, then you need to do more movements or more rotations or more scale. That requires more time, so that's not something that I want to do just yet. I like to start off simple and then move to the complex stuff as I progress, because all the simple stuff becomes more muscle memory, and then I actually like to challenge myself. That's where the complex stuff comes in, where I want to do like a walk cycle or a run cycle, which I do later on with future characters. Whenever I get to narrating that video, you guys will definitely get to see that. That movement was super simple, and that completes our animation. Now we need to just add the outline. I duplicate the character, rename it to outline, add the vertex group outline, add the mask modifier, solidify modifier, increase the thickness, increase the offset to 1, flip the normals, high quality normals, material index offset to 1, show vertex group to outline, vertex group in the mask modifier to outline, move solidify above the mask, add the second material, which is our outline material. Now just increase or decrease the thickness to whatever we like. Boom, we have our outlined character. I don't know, the outline just makes it a little bit more visible, I guess. I don't know, there's something that it does. I just like it. Makes it more cartoony. Most of my games kind of look cartoon anyways. A 3D version of it. To hide our imperfections on our low poly models, you just right click and shade smooth. Now everything just looks super smooth. With character 1.5, the Goofball Head guy, he has a pretty cool animation for the idle animation. We need to export this to FBX, click one of the previous names, change the value to 1.5, check selected objects, armature mesh, Z forward, uncheck add leaf bones, uncheck NLA strips, export our FBX. Boom, that concludes our video for character 1.5, Goofball Head guy. Hope you learned a little bit more about my workflow process in Blender. This one was a little bit more simple because I got like the workflow down in terms of blocking out, UV Unwrap, texture paint, rigging with Rigify, animation, and then all the little details like outline, all that stuff. This character made that process a little bit simpler. This video might be a little bit shorter, but it's more concise, it's more direct. You actually see the progress in me making this process a little bit more simpler to go through. Creating characters is not easy. That's something that's going to be daunting for a lot of people. Just seeing the process in the most simplest way that's understandable, easy to digest, makes this process much better. It makes you more willing to actually create your own characters. I hope you guys learned a little bit more about my process for character 1.5. I hope you watched the previous characters because there's a lot to learn from those videos as well. A lot of nuggets. We're going to be using this FBX file into creating the mechanic for character 1.5 in build box. And you can see something else that I come up with. I hope you check that out in the next video. Please like and subscribe. I appreciate all your help. Leave a comment if you enjoyed this video, or just leave a comment if you want to give some sort of name for these characters, or maybe stuff that you want to see in the future. If I have time to create some sort of tutorials that were maybe missed. Appreciate it, and see you next video. Peace out. Pow.